So from this moment onwards, we will record the session so that everybody is aware of that. The agenda of today is that we have a very interesting presentation by Mariska Zwijstra. And after that, we have a panel discussion. Mariska Zwijstra is from ELAAD. ELAAD did do this research on the stakeholder, which are important in the ecosystem for smart charging. And she did that together with her colleagues of ELAAD and also with my colleagues of FIER. I'm Edwin Westerbrugge from FIER Sustainable Mobility, and I will be your host today. After the presentation of Mariska, we will have a nice panel discussion with the colleagues from ELAAD, which is Flood Geerts, and he's the director and also the project manager of the whole scale project. And my colleague Willem Christiaans, who is also a representative of the work package 3, which is really related to the smart charging ecosystem, because that is about the pilots that are happening within the whole project of scale. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat. We have a big audience today, but we will also want to have you give you the opportunity to raise your questions. Put it in the chat, then we will check them, and we will give you at the end of the session the opportunity to ask the questions to the panel. So we will start with Mariska. She has a presentation of about 15 minutes. That will be about this smart charging ecosystem, who is who, what are their drivers and barriers. And then we will give the floor to the panel, which is also Mariska, but also Frank and Willem. And in that panel, you also can have your questions ready. So please, Mariska, if you can share your screen and give us the nice presentation, then afterwards I will come back to you.
Okay, I think I'm sharing my screen. Can you confirm, Edwin?
Yes, I see it.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you, Edwin, for your introduction. Welcome to this short presentation on the Stakeholder Management Report, which has been one of the first deliverables in the SCALE project. I would like to first walk you through what SCALE is all about. For those of you who might not be familiar with our project yet, just some short highlights. SCALE stands for Smart Charging Alignment for Europe, and we're a 3-year Horizon Europe project, and we're now on our way in just finishing the first year, going on for year 2 and 3. And we're working on the mass deployment of electric vehicles and smart charging. And what's really great about this project is we are collaborating with 7 European countries to establish smart charging and vehicle-to-X on all possible levels, so standards, protocols, but also consumer acceptance, policy, etc. And we are also making that possible through a vehicle-to-X alliance that we've been forming. So who are those partners? Like I said, we have 7 countries participating and even more partners, 29. They're all listed here with their logos. And if you're interested to learn more about them, you're of course welcome to visit our website. I'll have some links to that at the end of my presentation. But as you can see, we've got, if you're talking about stakeholders, we've actually got also already a lot of stakeholders present in the project as well, because we've got car manufacturers, we've got software developers, research institutes, cities and associations, and also grid operators. So with that consortium, we are able to do the level of intense research that we need to bring smart charging and vehicle-to-grid a step further. So then onto the stakeholder report. Actually, we delivered 2 stakeholder reports, one extensive one, which is the actual deliverable. And after we finished that, we decided that we actually needed something for a bit a broader audience, which would be more easy to read. So we've also produced a short read, which is very suitable for just getting all the highlights without going into detail. And as you can imagine, this presentation is relatively short, so I will not be able to give you all the details in my slides, but of course you will get the links to the reports after this webinar. So you're free to read it from front to back after the session. So stakeholders in smart charging and vehicle to grid, what are we then talking about? Well, we decided to make an overview of all the stakeholders involved. And then you can see it over here, how we organize that. So we start with the users, because in Scale we do a user-centric approach, which means that we put the user first. It's very important if you do smart charging that the users actually accept the smart charging protocols and the smart charging incentives. We need policy, of course. We need to make sure that what's happening is acceptable with respect to regulators and authorities. We need to be able to identify the results of smart charging. So we need knowledge partners in the stakeholder field. And you cannot do any charging at all without an electricity grid. So the power grid divided in the distribution system operator and the transmission system operator from the lower voltage to the highest voltage are important. And on that grid, we connect the hardware. So we have charging stations, we've got electric vehicles, we've got perhaps stationary batteries, solar panels, all kinds of hardware that we need to deliver cars with energy at the moment that the energy is available and that the energy is cheap or durable, etc. So talking about that energy, of course, we need partners as well. So we have stakeholders that produce the energy, or that and partners who make sure that the energy is of sufficient quality. So there we have balance responsible parties under level 6. We've got aggregators and flexibility service providers, all kinds of stakeholders involved in distributing the energy over the power grid in the desired quantities at the moment in time where it's needed. And then the final part is the actual charging. If we want to do smart charging, we have to have parties involved that can actually transmit the charging protocols from an overlying partner, for instance, from the power grid partners or from the policymakers or from the users to the cars. So that is where the charge point operators and the e-mobility service providers come into play. So this is basically the stakeholder field that's involved. And you can imagine that there's a lot of interaction between those. And that's also why I've drawn it here as a sort of interconnecting grid by itself, where all those stakeholders have connection with each other and have an influence on each other. So to go into a little bit detail from what's the stakeholder aspects are about. For instance, if you look at the EV drivers, so the users, we have to be able to identify what their needs are. So in the stakeholder analysis, we identified what types of users there are and we also designed a method to investigate in more detail what their needs are and how their population will change over time. And the first result is a part of one of our next webinars is a EV driver survey, which we conduct as part of the Scale research. We've already delivered the first measurement, which is sort of a zero measurement, and we're now analyzing the results of the first review over the whole of Europe. So you can expect results on that in one of our next webinars. Policy and legal, in our stakeholder analysis, we first looked into the as-is situation. What kind of legislation is already available or is currently being revised with respect to smart charging, with respect to vehicle to grid? And if you have the overview of that, then you can build further if you're talking about making a European-wide program and making a legislation that is applicable to all member states and is acceptable for all parties involved in the stakeholder field. For that, we also already did some more detailed research from our own perspective. So also one of the next webinars will be about this topic, where we will discuss the results of 17 interviews and 37 surveys that we conducted with policymakers and legislators throughout Europe. Here you can see a graph from that report where we can get an idea of where the response has originated from. So you can see that it goes even further than the countries that participate in the SKILL project. And we asked them questions about what is their perception of smart charging in their own country, what do they think the status is of legislation, etc. And of course, because we already did the detailed desk review in our stakeholder analysis, we can compare the views of those persons and of those parties with the things that we found in the investigation we did. So just to go back to this whole stakeholder field, like I said, it's all interconnected. And if you start to investigate a certain aspect, for instance, for the charging, you are inevitably saying things about other stakeholders as well. So for instance, if you are focusing on charging and you look at charging services and you're focusing on smart charging, bidirectional charging, fast charging, then of course you need the power grid to do that. You need to know if there's energy available. You need to have hardware that can use the commands that are being sent out to the chargers. And that brings you to a next part aspect, charging infrastructure, which again has all kinds of other stakeholders involved. Like you have to comply to certain local legislation. You have to certain safety measures that are involved with putting things on the grid. You have to be able to analyze the behavior of the charging infrastructure and to make prognosis of how the smart charging that you are carrying out will influence the grid and how it will influence the availability of energy. So that is basically the level of complexity that we're discussing in our stakeholder report. And some highlights of what we found for those different stakeholders is that, for instance, for knowledge, well, it was obvious from what we found that data availability is a really important aspect of doing any progressive work on smart charging. Without data, we cannot analyze the results, but also we cannot control the charging adequately. Because, for instance, you need to know when cars will be arriving, what their charging need will be, when they will be leaving, what their drivers are like, etc. So data is crucial for the knowledge stakeholders. And for the policymakers, well, it's pretty obvious if you look into all the different parties in Europe that we need a regulatory framework throughout Europe to make sure that we all talk about the same thing. If we want to do smart charging, we need to make sure that we have the same definition of what smart charging is. We need to have the same definition of what smart charging ready is or what vehicle to X ready is, because otherwise it's impossible to make protocols and make algorithms to control the charging if it means something different in each member state. So that is important for that part. And finally, what for this overview, that's not the final conclusion, of course, because we have lots of conclusions on all 7 stakeholders that are identified. But we found that the suppliers and aggregators, they really don't know how to put smart charging a step further. We've seen a lot of pilots, a lot of interesting insights proving that smart charging is a valuable asset in the energy system of the future, but how to determine a fair reward for offering flexibility or compensation, perhaps, and it depends on what stakeholder you're looking at. as some will need a reward and some will need a compensation, which is it sounds perhaps the same, but is different in the perception. Well, but how to determine what is fair, and also with respect to parties that cannot offer flexibility services, is really a complex puzzle to solve, which will need a lot of work in the future, and which is also what we will be doing, of course, in this skill project with our 29 partners. So I mentioned at the start that we're doing smart charging and vehicle to X. And with the vehicle to X part, we believe that it's really an important part of smart charging, because with vehicle to X, you have so much more potential to support the grid, to put more durable energy in the system, to make use of cheaper energy in a more efficient way. So we have quite a number of demonstrations and use cases going on in the project, which are again divided in a number of categories, which are also involving their own stakeholders, of course, because we have made a division from vehicle to home, where the users are obviously private consumers. We have vehicle to depot, for instance, buses and trucks. Vehicle to public, so public charging, which means that we have charge point operators, parking lot owners, and another type of users. And we have vehicle to business, where we look into how we can put vehicle to grid in use for supporting big office buildings, big factory buildings that have their own difficult energy demand. Vehicle to X can be a very interesting aspect for them as well. So those demonstrations and use cases will be taking place over the 7 countries in the project. Well, I've been talking already a bit about, of course, the stakeholder analysis, but also about the consumer behavior and well, not a bit about hard and software requirements. And those are the parts that we've already got deliverables for on our website. If you scan the QR code, it will bring you to the website of the Skill project, where all those 4 reports are available for download. So please make use of this opportunity to check it out. You can also, of course, just Google for Scale Horizon Europe and go to the website. And would be very happy to answer any questions about what I've been telling you all at this moment, but of course also any questions that you might have after reading those reports. So for the presentation part, I would like to conclude here and give the floor back to Edwin to invite the rest of the panel.
Yes, thank you, Mariska, for this very nice presentation, and also to the link to the real documents. I just want to raise again that if you have a question, please put it in the chat, because that's also easier for us to see what the question is about. I see Nick Bols raising his hand. I will give you the floor after we also introduce the 2 other panel members, which is Willem Christiaans and Frank Geerts. Yes, maybe Willem and Frank, can you open your camera and maybe give a very short introduction of yourself, and then we will start with the questions. And yeah, if you have a question from the audience, please put it in the chat, because then it's visible for us. Hi, Frank, how are you doing? Can you maybe shortly introduce yourself?
Hi, Ben. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Frank Geerts. I'm working for ELAAD, and ELAAD is the project coordinator of Scale. And within ELAAD, I'm also responsible, together with Mariska, for the smart charging and bidirectional charging uptake in at least the Netherlands.
Thank you. Willem, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Edwin. Yes, so my name is Willem Christiaans. I am a project manager at FIER Sustainable Mobility. And yeah, within Scale, we coordinate the work that we do in all the use cases. So we do 13 use cases in the different innovation clusters that Mariska just presented. Yeah, so and I'm coordinating that in my capacity.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how many stakeholders there are in such an ecosystem and how they have to cooperate together to get it work. I have a few questions to all three of you, because also for me, it's really a new topic. But of course, the energy world is already very important to have the system up and running. So first for Frank, I have a question. Frank, what is holding back system operators from fully developing flexibility markets and making optimal use of this flexibility, even if you see that the growing numbers of EVs are there? And that, of course, is a very much bunch of batteries. So, yeah, do you have an answer on that? What is holding back these system operators?
Yeah, I think so. Nothing is, I think, really holding back system operators like DSOs and TSOs. They are very eager to take advantage of the battery on wheels that is coming to the market. I think the question might be related to we have that flexibility, and with this program, Smart Charging Alignment for Europe, we are really trying to make a mass uptake. And well, we are not yet there with a mass uptake. In the Netherlands, we are a front runner, but even here, you need quite a lot of vehicles to make a difference on flexibility markets. And the volume of electric vehicles is simply not high enough to really have that, be able to deliver that services yet, but that will be there in quite a short time. What we are as system operators are also aiming for is like preventing congestion in the system. It's something we never had in the last century, and it's something that we don't want to have in the electricity system, because congestion means that we will create power failures. So our first priority is to prevent congestion, and by smart charging being managed by commercial parties in a smart way, they can help prevent congestion. But we do know now that congestion might be a topic, and is most likely a topic of the near future. Well, we can reinforce the grid, but we simply cannot cope with the speed of the transition. And therefore, we need flexibility in those cases where congestion is expected. Electric vehicles can help. In the Netherlands, we are piloting such a system. And we did several pilots also with electric vehicles. They look very promising, but to be honest, the scale of those pilots is relatively small. Even with 1,000 electric vehicles, you have limited real impact on the system yet. But it's something we are working very hard upon. It's complex because there is we saw all the stakeholders, and we all have to take them into account when you are organizing this congestion flexibility market. So I understand that there is a wish to do more, and I'm very happy to hear the eagerness of having the market being available. We are doing our best, but I think we will be there, and scale is an important project to enable and to get these markets up and running.
Thank you, Frank. I see also from the audience a question to Mariska, but first I want to raise also the question that I prepared. So, because you were talking about V2X, which is very interesting, and also, of course, it's bi-directional then, that's also discharging the vehicles towards the system. What are the major steps that need to be taken, particularly this bi-directional charging, to facilitate larger scale cooperation between the sectors and quickly adopt of smart charging solutions within that?
Yeah, that's one of the main things that we're focusing on in the project, that we need access to the key data that allows us to do vehicle to grid charging and discharging. And with key data, I mean, we need to know what the state of charge of the battery is, what the desired state of charge of the battery is at what moment in time. And at this moment, the user of a car can have access to all that information and can also tell their car when they're going to be back, etc. But they don't share the information as a standard with the charging system. And that's really something that we need to change. And also what we need to change is that we need a clear congestion management scheme. So that means that we need to determine what is the fair financial incentive that we can offer for flexibility services. Because if we don't have that in a well-defined, acceptable way, then there's no incentive for car manufacturers and charge point manufacturers to all participate in the vehicle-to-X market. And like Frank already said, we simply don't have enough cars now to make the desired volume to have impact in the discharging part. And that's because there's just a limited number of cars and chargers available. And then you're highly dependent on that specific car being present at a certain moment in time at a certain geographic location where you need the flexibility services. And that's of course a pity. If we could have all of the electric fleet to our disposal, we could really make an impact. And now it's sort of waiting. It's like the chicken and egg problem, where the legislation is not making progress in making the congestion management scheme, and as a result, the car manufacturers are just they're interested in doing pilots, gaining some research data, but not doing the big step forward. So yeah, that's basically the two things that we need, I think.
So the conclusion is that those pilots are very important towards already next steps. Yes, yeah. Willem, just to raise a question to you about these pilots, because Mariska saying, yeah, well, they want to be included in pilots. In Scale, we have a lot of pilots. And also the stakeholder analysis identifies several challenges for smart charging and V2X in relation to all these stakeholders that are involved in the pilots. What kind of challenges do you see back in these pilots? Of course, they're still in the starting phase, but do you already see challenges there, Willem?
Yeah, good question, Edwin. Yeah, so over the last year, we have been working very hard in Scale with the 13 use cases that we do to set up these use cases to actually make sure that everything is in place to do what we set out that we wanted to do. And because of this stage that we find ourselves in, the challenges that we see are very much from technical nature. So what we are doing in these use cases in the end is we set out to do a number of energy services per use case, and it can be like optimization behind the meter, but it can also be grid related services like balance responsibility, congestion management, or system balancing related services. But for all these services, we need a lot of data exchange, which is key. And Mariska already mentioned this just now. The exchange of data is very important. And looking at stakeholders, we see a lot of stakeholders that provide a component within this whole ecosystem that needs to allow this data exchange. So that's very important for all these different stakeholders. And looking at existing protocols that are now mainstream in the market, we see that the data exchange is that we can do through these protocols is insufficient. So for instance, communicating between the car, the charge point, and also communicating towards the CPO. You need protocols for that. And yeah, what is mainstream today, we cannot, it's not enough for us in the pilots that we do to do what we set out to do. So we need to adopt newer standards. And fortunately, these are there. The ISO 15118-20, for instance, is a very important one. But also OCPP, the latest release there, is an important standard that allows us to do all this data exchange. So where we focus ourselves on in the pilots actually adopt these standards, and because it's very new, there's a lot of, from all these different stakeholders, a lot of development efforts and work to be done, but we're getting there, so that's a good thing to see. Also in relation to the grid services, to balance the grid, We also see that there's not so many protocols there, but we have partners on board in Scale, like EQG, that provides a platform that is a big enabler for us to also provide these kind of services. And this is something that we demonstrate in the pilots. So that's on the technical side. Also on the regulatory side, we in the work that we've done so far with the use cases, we ran into some challenges, and that's mainly in relation to really scaling up to mass deployment. One interesting challenge that we recently encountered there has to do with grid code compliance, which basically means that every generator that you have providing electricity into the electricity system needs to comply to these standards, the standards of a certain country. But the additional layer of complexity that you find with bidirectional charging, especially in relation to AC charging, that you have these mobile generators that can move from country to country, can cross borders, that actually need to comply with many different grid codes, and they need to know where they are located in order to know to which grid code they need to comply with. So this is something that the existing regulatory framework is not did not had in mind when it was developed. So there's something new and something that is a barrier that we are picking this up in Scale and addressing further to come up with some directions for solutions there. So that's on the challenges in the pilots, Edwin.
Okay, thank you. A lot to do, I think, also in the pilot. In the meantime, there are very interesting questions coming in from the audience. So let's go to those questions. And I saw in the beginning that Nick Bowles raised his hand. I don't see him back now, but he raised this question in the chat. So it was a question from Mariska. I will give you the floor on the answer for this. Mariska, how do you see the role of a CPO versus the DSO/TSO concerning stabilizing the grid and monetizing VPPs? Will the CPO be an active player on the energy market or react to demand response signals? And second question was, have you already talked to, for example, Elia about it?
Okay, well, interesting question. I think the charge point operator and also the aggregator is a very important stakeholder in doing smart charging. And how we see it in the Netherlands is that the DSO/TSO just makes sure that the boundary conditions for doing charging are known by all other stakeholders. That means that the DSO and TSO just define how much power can be used in a certain geographic location or how much can be discharged in that location and what is needed to maintain frequency in the grid. If you look at it from the TSO perspective. And then within those boundaries, the charge point operator is the party that that makes money for the consumers, for the users, that makes sure that the cars are operated effectively so that you have a most efficient charge considering the boundary conditions that you have to work within. So those are actually the parties that have the combined volume of a considerable number of vehicles, which means that they can be a partner on all kinds of markets. In contrast to individual cars operated just under a home energy management system, which can of course charge under certain boundaries of a grid operator, but cannot be as smart as can be obtained when their volume is higher. So yeah, I think they're really important. And I have never talked to Elia before myself, but I'm sure that there are some partners in the Scale project who have. And that's also one of the advantages of doing this project together, because we learn from each other. Every time we discuss a certain topic, there's always some partner that says, oh, I've got some ideas on this because we've talked to that and that partner outside the project. So yeah, I think that's really added value.
Right, thank you. Then I see a question from Greg Payne, and actually 2 questions. I think I can give you the floor, Greg, if you like. So I can give you the possibility to ask your question yourself. I'm not sure if you can open your camera, but at least I can give you the possibility now to speak. I hope it works.
Thank you, Edwin. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So really my first question was really understanding where panelists see the optimum balance between mandating smart functionality on charge points, which is something that's happened here in the UK, and the standardization of provision of services from charge points, such as flexibility products, and taking a more sort of free market approach and allowing innovation and allowing people to do their own thing. So that was my first question.
Good question, Greg. Who wants to answer this one? I see Frank.
Yeah, I want to start with it, and then others can add, but I think it's not one versus the other. I think if you look at the energy system, and especially electric vehicles by far provide the most flexibility in our new energy system. And they have a pretty high charging possibility of 11 kilowatt if you're in a home environment, and they have a storage capacity of 100 kilowatt hours. So that's a really game changer device. And to allow consumers to enable them to take part of the electricity market, we must make sure that both the car and the charge point are able to do the smart charging stuff, so that you as a consumer can react to price incentives or to sustainable incentives. So for example, when you have solar panels, you want to charge your car with your own solar panels, the technology should enable you that. And I think that is where we think that smart charging functionality or technology should be mandatory, to allow market players to come up with the best smart charging or bidirectional charging services for consumers or end users, to make money or to help to minimize carbon emissions. So I don't think it's a contradiction. I think you need technology minimum requirements to enable the market to have innovation and to let the companies compete to each other.
Thank you. It answered your first question, Greg, I guess. And what was your second?
Yeah, so thank you very much for that, Frank. So my second one was following on from Mariska, one of your comments. So it's interesting to hear from the work you've done on the Scale project that aggregators and suppliers are struggling to find this sort of fair and competitive price for flexibility services. And thinking about it, I can see why that price might be a bit opaque, as there's so many stakeholders in the chain, and it's quite a complicated, I guess, proposition in terms of, the movement of flexibility services from the end consumer up through to suppliers and aggregators and into wholesale markets potentially. So I can understand that could be an issue. So I guess my question is around, do you think perhaps there may be a place for providing a subsidy or guarantee for a minimum value of flexibility to consumers? Maybe that could be government funded or something, to sort of stimulate the market, to give the consumer some certainty on the value they would get from allowing someone to smartly control the charging of their vehicle.
Yeah, well, that with that question, you basically tackle one of the most difficult parts of what we're doing, because indeed all those parties are interconnected, and if a charge point operator is offering certain services, then of course it's logical that they get some sort of part of the reward. But then on the other hand, the car that the user is driving is a necessary item to be able to do any smart charging. So why would a car be rewarded differently at a home charger, at an office charger, at a public charger, etc.? So a minimum value for flexibility would indeed be a good idea, I think. But what comes in play there is who is the party that is awarding the flexibility reward. So if it is a grid operator, then there's a lot of steps to take before getting the reward to the end user. Because normally the contracts for charging are of course by mobility service partners. So there's also some steps in between the DSO and the end user. If you look at the public charging, if you look at the office charging, and yeah, and we're currently looking into how we can make some sort of flex offer in terms of grid connection tariffs, which would be a fair thing to do from the DSO TSO perspective. But then once again, it is not so clear how to get it to the end user as well. And perhaps one of the conclusions will be in the end that we cannot always reward the car, but I personally think that would be unfair. So yeah, I'm not sure if you feel like thinking with us would be much appreciated, because we've been talking with ministries, with policymakers, with DSOs, TSOs, and it's just one of the most complicated puzzles that I've ever seen. Yeah, which makes it cool, because I really think we will be able to solve it in a fair way. But I'm not sure if I answered your question in a
Maybe I may add, Mariska. I think this is indeed a very interesting question, Greg, and one which we debate and we do not always agree upon. So one perspective I want to bring in play is that I don't think that we need a minimum value. And the reason for that is that I think the value is already present. So last Sunday in the Netherlands, there was negative electricity prices. And I read several Twitter messages of people saying, I just earned 10 euros by charging my car thanks to the negative electricity prices. And they had, of course, an energy contract with flexible pricing, an hourly pricing. So they already made money, quite substantially money on just one day. They would have liked to make more by V2G. So by charging the car, getting the energy out of it, and then recharging and making more money. But also other players in the Netherlands are already offering services that provide a value for smart charging. So by just waiting for more cheaper moments to charge your car, you can already reduce, so it's not earning, but savings, literally a couple of €100 a year on your charging. So this is what's already available in this limited market as value for smart charging. So that would argue that there is no reason to give a subsidy or a guarantee, because apparently this value is somehow already in the market. But once more, this is one view, and I think what Mariska says, this is something really for debate to see, yeah, but what we need to do on this.
Yeah, but what I meant with my response, Frank, is that it's very straightforward if you have your own private charger, but it becomes a lot more complicated if you don't charge at your private charger and you want to treat all cars equal, because all cars are helping maintain the stability on the grid. So we at the grid operator part, we always try to treat every party equal, and yeah, that's some of the parts that are more complicated, because of course a market party needs to be rewarded for service offered as well. So then inevitably if you give an incentive like the dynamic pricing to the consumer, then some of that will get lost for the mobility service provider or the CPO if you don't have your own charger. So that's where I think also part of Greg's question is about, that it's not as easy as it may seem to treat everybody equal. And yeah, so like I said, also maybe it is not possible to treat everybody equal, but I would want to try to make it as equal as possible.
Thank you. I think that is answer to your question, Greg. Good that you raised them. There is also a lot of interest in the vehicle side. And of course, in Scale, we have vehicle manufacturers included. And there are a couple of questions about the vehicles. For example, how many cars are able to operate already V2X? And another was the example of the Renault 5 EV. Once they are be produced, are we going to include them in our pilots, for example? And is there a list of cars which are able to discharge, for example, via AC? Who wants to answer the questions on the vehicles?
Perhaps I can answer this one, Edwin.
Yes, if you like.
Yeah, so what we see in the market already is that there are many cars that can do vehicle to load. So that's bidirectional charging. So those are cars that are currently entering the market. We see what we see in Scale is that cars that are actually doing bidirectional charging and supply the electricity into the grid. Yeah, that is now coming. So we see that the different car manufacturers within the Scale project, for instance, they are developing that. So we're testing that in Scale, but it's very new. And the things that I just mentioned around grid codes, for instance, that is something that also the car OEMs have to deal with. So I think in order to really upscale for mass deployment and to have car OEMs enter the market with V2X capable cars, there are still some hurdles to overcome to do that for the mass market.
Thank you, Willem. Yeah, we're running out of time, but there are still coming questions in, also on the pilots itself, but I think that we will do in another workshop. And of course, all the information on the pilots is on the website. So for example, how many vehicles in Utrecht, how many vehicle and chargers in Munich. So I think I skip those for now. There is one interesting question, maybe you have answers already on. That's the one on the standard. Is standard technology developed enough already? Does ISO 15118 cover all data and energy transfer for this? Who wants to answer that question?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that, Edwin, because one of the reports Mariska was referring to did actually an analysis of the mainstream protocols and also the data exchange. I don't want to give it away, all conclusions of this report, but I think so there's lots of details and nitty-gritty things which need to be taken into account. But my overall takeaway from that report is that the current published most recent versions, for example, the 1511A-20, do include are capable of exchanging the required data information. They are not yet implemented in all devices because they are relatively new. The same applies for OCPP. OCPI is lagging a bit behind, but also there a new version has been announced. So I think that on a protocol level, we are definitely heading in the right direction in writing everything down and making sure that data can be exchanged. It's now more of having those newest versions being implemented, and that's one of the challenges Willem was referring to in pilots or in general at this point in time. But I think if you want to know the details, it's very good to go to the next webinar or already download the report available. And I think by the end of summer, even a new report with more details on data energy, data exchange will be published by Scale. I don't think that I know it for sure.
Great, thank you, Frank. I will want to say that all the questions which are still there, we put them also in documents, and later on we can also answer them maybe by email. We wanted to have this webinar not longer than maybe 50 minutes. We are already in 52. So I want to thank Frank, Willem, and Mariska for the very interesting panel and also presentation. I will share my screen now because I have some announcement on the next sessions. So I hope when I share my screen that you all can see it. It takes a little bit. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yeah.
Or not yet. Yes. Yeah, of course, for the summer, this is it. So now we are all going on holidays, but after summer, we still have very interesting sessions. So session 2, it's not planned yet, but we expect it in September. And that's more about cities and regions needs and challenges in integrated planning for smart charging and V2X services. Look at our website and in LinkedIn to see when it is planned. And then you can also assign again as participant for that webinar. Then the third one will be late September. That will be about hardware and software. That's Frank was already raised about requirements for EVs, charging stations, and charge point operators for vehicle to grid and vehicle to X. And the last session, session 4, is about, that's also what Mariska raised, consumer behavior, needs and challenges, including smart charging and V2X, and that will be mid-October. So between summer holidays and holiday after, the 3 sessions will be after this one. So I think it's all interesting to follow that. So look at LinkedIn and the website, and those are the addresses for us. If you want to Twitter about Scale, of course, we also have a Twitter account. I want to thank everybody for participating in this webinar, and yeah, have a good summer, have good holidays, and we hope to see you all in early September and in the other webinars. Thank you all, and see you later.